summertime. Time to sit back, relax, grab your Switch and play some chill JRPGs in your spare time, right? Play a game like Xenoblade Chronicles and get lost in its beautiful world and rich narrative. Be swept away by these tunes. Go explore and just be. That was my intention when I picked up Xenoblade Chronicles a couple of weeks ago. I played for a bit and I enjoyed myself. I did some questing, exploring, fighting, and I advanced the plot step by step. But then, one night, after a lengthy play session, I sat back and I asked myself the following question. Why do I not care for anything that happens in this game? I think I should care. The game presents an interesting premise for a story. Two everlasting beings, as old as time itself, locked in eternal combat. Titans whose very bodies would become the foundation for life in this world. And life found a way, as it always does. The lands formed by the remnants of the Mechonis, the titan who opposed the Mechonis, are flourished with life. Wide stretches of lush green meadows, forests, lakes, and mountains all inhabited by creatures of all kinds. Everything from small bunnias to oversized giants roam the lands. And of course, a humanoid race, the so-called Homs, have found their place in this world too. But not everything is as quaint and perfect as it may seem at first. There's another force at play here, a race of intelligent, maleficent, mechanic beings that seem to have one sole purpose: humanity's extinction. Humanity is almost entirely wiped out by that overpowered alien force that feels like it could strike at any moment. There's genuine tension here, a looming threat just waiting for the right time to deal the final blow. The game does a great job of pulling me in. The intro cinematic makes it blatantly clear what is at stake here. It's about the survival of humanity itself. It's about putting everything on the line to oppose an omnipotent foe in a hopeless attempt to prevail. Admittedly, it's quite the traditional setup for a story, but it works. I was on board. Again. Again? Well, this was not my first ride with Xenoblade Chronicles. Years ago, when the definitive edition was released, I thought it was finally time to scratch that game off my backlog. I played for about 8 hours before losing interest and dropping it. Now, why is that? Well, back in the day, I just felt overwhelmed by the sheer size of it all. The areas weren't just large, they were enormous. You see, I was never a fan of huge open worlds, and the fact that this game had me running around these massive stretches of land did not really appeal to me. Of course, I made use of the fast travel system back then, but there was still a lot of running, which honestly kind of bored the hell out of me. Then there were these side quests, and my god, they were so generic and awful, and they just kept on coming. I have a weird brain. I have this sort of completionist mentality. If a game gives me a list of quote-unquote optional things to do, they don't register as optional to me, they might as well be plot-relevant main quests. Xenoblade apparently has 400 of them. 400. And some of them are timed, which had me experience a level of FOMO I had never felt before. So, all these years ago, I just called it quits. I didn't care enough for the story and characters to sit through 400 lame-ass side quests and play a game for more than 100 hours that I honestly didn't enjoy all that much to begin with. If the overall gameplay and combat had been engaging enough, who knows if I had kept on playing. But for me, combat was fine at best, but pretty mind-numbing at worst. I don't mind to have this real-time but actually turn-based combat system based on abilities, cooldowns and positioning. I enjoy playing games like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XII that designed their combat in a similar way. But it's not something that pulls me in. It's not a combat system so interesting, challenging or complex that I would play the game simply for the joy of fighting enemies. So yeah, back then I just had it with this game. Combat felt mid and the pacing and quest design were such a bore, I just didn't feel inclined to pick up my Switch to play this game again. Time went on and Xenoblade slowly faded into obscurity, like a fleeting memory. I had come to terms that this game just wasn't for me. Then this year came around and I found myself in a strange mood. I was looking for a game to simply drop myself in. A game that would just pull me into its world and present me with a plethora of things to do that would help me take my mind off of IRL stuff. I wasn't looking for a tight narrative experience, but a game that allows for a certain kind of meandering. A world where I could just run around and take it all in. A game that would allow me to take it slow, take a long breath and just be. I remembered Xenoblade. Had I truly given it a fair chance all these years ago? Wasn't there more for me? Just something buried underneath the heaps of side content and monotonous exploration? Indeed, this quote-unquote monotonous exploration sounded kind of appealing to me now. And there were aspects of the game that felt promising at the time. As I said earlier, the premise of the story, the world building and character writing were appealing to me. Playing Shulk, an engineer and mechon technology nerd, felt somewhat fresh and like a departure from traditional JRPG protagonist tropes. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe it was a matter of approaching the game with a different mindset. If I managed to turn off my compulsive need to finish every single quest, I could have fun with this game. And thus, I booted up Xenoblade Chronicles again and started from the very beginning, a blank slate. I was ready to go all in this time. At first, my way of approaching this game differently bore fruit. I took my time, going as far as to even start slow walking every now and again, to really appreciate the beautiful environments and vistas that Xenoblade presented. I found myself enjoying the story too. Yes, there were moments that felt kind of cliched, but not to an extent that would make the whole experience unbearable for me. The core theme of the game was strong, and I wanted to see it through. Admittedly, there were moments where I doubted the game's narrative. Be aware that we are now approaching spoiler territory. I will talk about events in the game that occur around the 10 to 12 hour mark. You can go to this timecode if you want to avoid spoilers, but I think you'd miss out on the core message of this video, so yeah, it's up to you. Pretty early in the game, it is established that Shulk can use the Monado's power to look into the future. He cannot really control this power, but has spontaneous visions of future events that mostly involve, well, people getting killed. And he just refuses to talk about that with people. And it drove me insane. Seriously, in the early game, this happened twice in a row with very little time in between, and I just thought to myself, Shulk, bro, you know this person is going to die. Tell them, what the fuck are you doing? And then, when it happened the next time, Shulk was actually called out for this. Ryan, of all people, was the most reasonable person in that scene and straight up told Shulk how fucking stupid it was to keep that shit to himself. That scene won me over. It was like the game knew exactly what I was thinking and responded in the most elegant and genius way. And it used Ryan, knucklehead fucking Ryan to deliver the message. It was lovely. But then the cracks started to show. I think it all started after leaving Colony 9 behind and a new antagonist was revealed. Zord. My god, did I hate this guy. Zord felt like a wake-up call to me. He was grabbing me by the shoulders, shaking me furiously and kept screaming into my face, "What are you doing? Why are you playing this?" I think I need to explain myself. There's a certain style of writing in games that I just can't stand. It is featured in games like Fire Emblem Engage, the Tales of series, or the Zero Escape games. Usually, people refer to this style of writing as anime. I always found myself on the side of people who strongly dislike anime writing. Tropey, stereotypical, over-the-top, hyper-emotionalized writing that I never really could take all too seriously. I'm a fan of grounded stories, subtle storytelling, nuanced presentation, deep character-driven conflict, and development. Games like Disco Elysium or Vagrant Story simply play in another league for me compared to games like Unicorn Overlord, even though that game offers some of the best gameplay I've experienced in years. However, I also like Persona. I played 13 Sentinels rather recently, and I adored every second of it. Aren't these games also known for their typical quote-unquote anime writing? I feel like I need to go deeper to really explain why I enjoy the writing in something like Phoenix Wright or Nier Automata, but despise it in a game like, well, Xenoblade. I think it comes down to three things. Three narrative elements that I just can't stand anymore. The funny thing is, in Xenoblade Chronicles, this section in which Zord is introduced is a great example for all three elements. So let's briefly go over each one. Number 1. Shit-talking comic book antagonists that really need you to know how evil they are. This one should be obvious. I just can't stand it anymore. There are so many JRPGs with big bad guys that are just evil for the sake of being evil. And they love it so much. In every scene they will mock the player, make fun of their weakness, and emphasize again and again how super strong they are, and that there is no way the protagonist could stop them. Zord was particularly obnoxious with this. But he's just one example for a much larger phenomenon. In games like Trails in the Sky 2nd Chapter, this happens all the time. In a game that puts such a big focus on character writing, it is disheartening to see how piss poor each member of the antagonist's group is written. The worst thing, in my opinion, is when terrible antagonists whose actions are just plain evil get a quote-unquote deep backstory at the end of the game, which is supposed to vindicate their actions somehow. I'm sorry if you had a troubled childhood or if you're a victim of war or whatever, but that doesn't justify mass murder in my book. And don't get me wrong, it's absolutely fine to have complete maniacs as antagonists in games. Kefka in Final Fantasy VI is a very prominent example, but at least I didn't feel like the game was trying to make me feel bad for this jester. Number 2. Predictable voice lines that are so predictable because I've heard variations of them a million times in other games. I'm sure we all remember plenty of scenes that follow this exact same pattern. You have a conversation between two plot-relevant characters, and one of them brings up a term you haven't heard before. For example, something like, "Oh, you cannot harm me, I am protected by the Aegis." And then the other one immediately goes like, the Aegis? And for some reason, in most cases, the first guy will explain what he meant by that, and maybe even drop a hint or two how to defeat him. It's the Metal Gear moment. Or in the case of Xenoblade, the true Monado moment. I don't know, I feel like this trope is so overused to just dump a bunch of lore onto the player. And it never feels natural to me. Let me find out about the Aegis or the true Monado or whatever by exploring an old rune and finding a lost stone tablet or something, and not by having the enemy tell me the one way to defeat them. It's just, I don't know, it just feels lame to me. Predictability is a problem of its own that goes beyond just knowing what a character is going to say. I don't know if I just played too many JRPGs at this point, but I feel like many of them are really not so subtle when it comes to giving the player hints about certain plot points. Like in the very first scene in Xenoblade, the game points out that a certain character is really well versed in using metal claws in battle. He's also introduced as an absolute douchebag. Shortly after, literally still in the tutorial section of the game, a Mechon enters the stage. He has long metal claws and seems to be a bit of a douchebag. He also seems to be almost human in nature. I wonder if there might be a connection here. Mind you, I don't know that at this point. As I said, I only played 12 hours and nothing has been revealed about this so far, but I just have this feeling, you know? I don't mind having a twist like that, but when the big reveal comes and everyone is super shocked, I just stand by, slowly nodding my head in complete and utter boredom. There are good ways to surprise players with narrative twists and turns that you didn't see coming. It's a true balancing act as a writer. You don't want to spoil anything for the player, but you want to give them just enough information so the big reveal doesn't feel completely out of place. I feel like JRPGs often fall victim to the former, giving way too much information and thus lessen the effect of the plot twist when it occurs. I may start sounding like a broken record, but Yasumi Matsuno games are so good with this. A twist in Vagrant story, and there are some, never feels unearned or out of place, while still giving you something you didn't see coming. At least, that's how I felt. It's achieved by good character writing and subtle hints that there's more to the story than meets the eye. Pretty early on, you get the feeling that things are not quite as straightforward as they seem. What's the true objective of Sydney? What really happened in Ashley's past? The game makes you wonder and it leaves a trail of breadcrumbs for you to follow, but it doesn't scream in your face like, "Look, did you notice? This is that same thing you've already seen before. May there be a connection? Because yeah, I did see it, and yes, I know there's a connection. It's not clever. Number 3. Deus Ex Machina moments that simply make no fucking sense at all, no matter how you look at them. Yeah, this is the one I truly hate, and so many games pull shit like that. You all know it. The one crucial moment where everything is at stake. People's lives are on the line, the situation is hopeless, but then, all of a sudden, a hero appears out of nowhere to save the day. Everyone is saved, we all go home, happy end. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit here, but this trope becomes so overused in games that I just can't take seemingly dangerous situations serious anymore. It sucks out all of the tension of a scene if I know that someone will surely come any second now to save the day. In the scene with Zord, this happens like 3 times in a row. First, Shulk saves Otharan. Then Ryan jumps after him, and once they're all safe and leave the mine, they face a group of enemies that seems, well, invincible to them. Only to be saved by Dunban and Dixon, who were just waiting for the right moment, I guess? Admittedly, in the early game, there is a similar scene where I expected a Deus Ex Machina moment to occur, but it didn't. So, props to them, but I feel like this was an exception. a neat little trick to make the player think that there are truly dire consequences in this game, though in reality that was only an isolated event. I don't know, again, I've only played for about 12 hours, so who knows, but I felt like this trope is used a lot in Xenoblade. This whole thing made me think about this term, anime writing in general. What does it mean and why does it work for me sometimes and heavily repel me in other games? The most outrageous and over-the-top moments in Phoenix Wright feel absolutely fine to me. In fact, they are part of the reason I love these games so much. When Dante screams, "I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!" Of course, it's stupid as hell, but it absolutely fucking works. Within the context of this game, it fits super well. Maybe that's the key word here. Context. If a game uses these super over-emotionalized scenes in an overly dramatic way, in a setting that is somewhat comedic and lighthearted, they don't feel out of place for me. But if a game is going for a more serious tone and uses the same tropes, it falls apart for me. I don't take the characters serious anymore. I don't buy their performance. It all seems fake and contrived to me. I think that if a game wants to tell a serious story, it should rely on a serious, more grounded writing style. I know I bring up Vagrant story in pretty much every video at this point, but this is the kind of writing that achieves what it sets out to do. It has layers. Characters don't just act the way they do for the sake of creating drama and emotion. They have backstories, reasons, ambitions of their own. Antagonists are not inherently evil, but have nuances. Maybe a supposed enemy turns out to be an ally, but not in a twisty, gotcha anime kind of way, but in a natural way, because you find out more about their intentions, or they go through a character arc of some kind. Maybe I'm alone with this, but I feel like JRPGs from the 90s and early 2000s managed to do that quite elegantly, whereas blockbuster AAA JRPGs of our time mostly rely on emotion, drama, and tropes. This was a weird journey we've just gone on. I hope I didn't come across as too jaded or ignorant. This was not meant as a way to shit-talk Xenoblade or its narrative design. As I said earlier, Xenoblade did have some scenes that genuinely surprised me by subverting my expectations and actively going against those tropes that bother me so much. But it also fell victim to some of the things that annoy me so much in modern JRPG stories. I know I've mentioned this a couple of times throughout the entire video, but I need to stress again that I've only seen 12 hours of content in Xenoblade. I've barely scratched the surface in terms of what this game has to offer narrative-wise. I just feel there's a certain writing style and direction that I don't particularly like. That's why I used this game as an example for this video. If you're a fan of this game and you believe that I have robbed myself of one of the deepest and just best video game stories of all time, please let me know in the comments. In any case, please don't take this as an attack on your favorite JRPG, and please let me know in the comments if you disagree and why. I'd love to get a conversation going about what people love and don't love about the writing in these games. For now, I dropped the game, and I don't think I'll pick it up again soon. But who knows what the future might hold. It is ours for the taking. Am I right?